In the far north, a surname was never just a surname. It could point to a fjord, a farm, a father's name, a trading route, or a place so cold and remote that only the people who lived there could truly imagine it. In Scandinavia, names were practical first and symbolic later. They told you who belonged to whom, where a family had settled, and sometimes what kind of life they had survived. Vikings sailed outward. Kings centralized power. Churches began writing names into records. Farmers moved. Traders crossed seas. Soldiers left home. Emigrants boarded ships for America, Canada, Australia, and every other place that promised space, work, or a chance to begin again. Once those people left, their names traveled with them. That is how surnames born in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and the wider Scandinavian world ended up scattered across family trees on several continents. Some still look unmistakably Nordic. Some were softened by spelling changes. Others blend so deeply into English, German, or American records that people never realize they began in the north. And if one of these names is yours, it may carry a story of seafaring, endurance, migration, or a family that simply kept moving until the old homeland became a memory. Andersen is one of the clearest examples of a Scandinavian surname that made itself at home almost everywhere. The name means son of Anders, and Anders is the Scandinavian form of Andrew. That patronymic pattern was once one of the most common naming systems in the north, especially in Sweden and Norway. What makes Andersen powerful is not rarity but reach. It could belong to a farmer, a sailor, a blacksmith, or an emigrant who crossed an ocean and kept the old pattern alive in a new language. In many places, it became so common that people stopped noticing its origin. If Andersen appears in your family tree, you may be looking at a line that once belonged to a chain of sons whose identities were tied directly to their fathers. In the north, that was often enough to preserve a family name for generations. Hansen is one of the most recognizable Swedish surnames in the world. It means son of Johan, and Johan is a Scandinavian form of John. For centuries, names like this were not fixed family surnames in Sweden, so much as patronymics that changed with each generation. That detail matters, because Johansen tells you something about the moment a family began to settle into modern record-keeping. At some point, a naming pattern that had once shifted every generation became stable enough to pass down. That shift happened slowly, through church records, government rules, and the needs of a modern state. Today, Johansen is everywhere. It appears in migration records, passenger lists, census forms, and family trees that cross the Atlantic or the North Sea. If your family has this name, it may be a clue that your ancestors came from a society where identity was once fluid and later became fixed on paper. Nielsen is one of the classic Danish surnames, and it means son of Niels. Niels is the Danish form of Nicholas, and for a long time, Denmark used patronymic naming just as much as its neighbors did. The result was a country full of names that described relationships rather than permanent family lines. Nielsen became especially widespread because it was both traditional and adaptable. It could travel from a rural parish into a city, from a fishing village into an immigration record, and from Denmark into the wider Danish diaspora. In places like the United States, it often became Nielsen, Nelson, or even Nelson depending on how the name was heard and written. That is why a name like Nielsen can be both ordinary and significant. It may look simple, but it can mark a family's transition from an old northern naming world into a modern one. Larsen means son of Lars, and Lars is the Scandinavian form of Lawrence. This surname is especially common in Denmark and Norway, but it also appears widely in North America because so many families carried it outward during the 19th and early 20th centuries. The interesting thing about Larsen is how cleanly it preserves the old system, while also hinting at movement. A family with this name may have once belonged to a local community where everyone's identity was built from parentage and place. Then the family moved, and the name stayed while everything else changed. If Larsen is in your tree, you may be looking at a branch that left the north during the age of emigration, when thousands of Scandinavians searched for farmland, work, or stability elsewhere. The name may sound plain, but the journey behind it often was not. Hansen is another patronymic giant. It means son of Hans, and Hans is a Scandinavian form of John, just like Johann. That means Hansen can be found across Denmark, Norway, and parts of northern Germany where Scandinavian influence was strong. Because the name is so common, people sometimes underestimate it, but common names often carry the widest human stories. Hansen families were sailors, craftsmen, farm workers, merchants, and settlers. Some stayed in their home region for centuries. Others moved repeatedly, following trade and opportunity. Hansen is the kind of surname that tells you less about nobility than about continuity. It is a working name, built from daily life. And those are often the names that survive longest in family memory, because they were carried by ordinary people who kept building new lives in hard places. Sorensen means son of Soren, and Soren is the Danish form of Severinus. The surname is especially associated with Denmark, where patronymics remained strong into the modern period. In older records, you may find several spellings, especially when the name crossed into English language documents. That crossing matters. When Scandinavian families emigrated, the accents disappeared, the spelling shifted, and the names had to survive in forms that clerks could understand. Sorensen often became Sorensen, and sometimes the family accepted the change permanently. If this surname is in your ancestry, it may point to a family that lived through the exact moment when a local naming tradition became part of the global migrant experience. The name is simple, but the history behind it is deeply tied to transformation. Svensson is one of the most distinctly Swedish surnames of all. It means son of Sven. And Sven is an old Scandinavian given name with deep roots in the region's history. For a long time, names like Svensson were not fixed in the way English surnames were. They were inherited in movement, not permanence. Eventually, that changed. Sweden moved towards stable surnames, and names that once updated every generation became family identities. Svensson is therefore both ancient and modern. It belongs to the older naming world, but it also shows how Scandinavia adapted to bureaucratic life. If Svensson appears in your family tree, it may be a strong sign of Swedish origin. It may also be a sign that your family entered modern records early enough for a patronymic to become a lasting surname. That is a small detail with a big genealogical meaning. Eriksson means son of Eric, and Eric is one of the most iconic names in the Nordic world. It appears in royal history, Viking history, and countless parish records. Because Eric was so common, surnames derived from it spread widely through Norway, Denmark, and parts of Sweden. Eriksson families often came from communities where names were practical markers rather than grand declarations. A boy was identified by his father, and the next generation adjusted accordingly. That simplicity helped the name survive through generations of ordinary life. When emigrants carried Eriksson abroad, the name sometimes changed into Eriksson or Eriksson, especially in countries where English spelling rules took over. If your tree contains one of these forms, it may still lead you back to the same northern naming logic. Identity built one generation at a time. Pedersen means son of Petter, and Petter is the Scandinavian form of Peter. This name is especially common in Denmark and Norway, and it appears often in records where families move from one parish to another, or from the countryside into the city. Pedersen matters because it shows the power of repetition. A surname like this could exist in thousands of unrelated lines, but each one still reflects the same cultural pattern. It tells you that for a long time, family identity in Scandinavia was less about permanent labels and more about relationships and continuity. As families emigrated, Pedersen often became Petersen, Pedersen, or even Peters. Those changes can make research difficult, but they also reveal how names adapt when they leave their original language environment. If Pedersen is in your family, the spelling may have changed, but the root is still strongly Scandinavian. Madsen means son of Mads, and Mads is a Danish form of Matthew. This is a thoroughly Danish surname, and it often appears in areas where rural life, Church records and local parish identity kept naming patterns alive for centuries. What makes Madsen interesting is how clearly it reflects the older Scandinavian system while still feeling modern to the eye. It is short, direct, and practical. That was the logic of patronymics. Names should tell you something useful, not just something decorative. If Madsen appears in your ancestry, you may be tracing a line that moved from a Danish village into a wider world of migration and record-keeping. It is the kind of surname that looks simple until you realize it opens a door into the history of how Scandinavian families name themselves. Olafson means son of Olaf, and Olaf is a deeply Swedish name tied to saints, kings, and centuries of local use. The surname is strongly associated with Sweden, where patronymics were common and later became formalized into hereditary family names. This is one of those surnames that can tell you a lot about timing. If your ancestors were Olafson in old Swedish records, they may have lived during the transition from changing patronymics to fixed surnames. That transition is one of the most important turning points in Scandinavian genealogy. Olafson also traveled well. Emigrants often shortened it or adapted it, but the original form can still be found in immigrant communities in older records. It is a name that carries both the older rural world and the modern diaspora in the same spelling. Jorgensen means son of Jorgen, and Jorgen is the Danish form of George. It is a classic Danish surname, but one that can also appear in Norwegian records. The special character in the spelling often disappears when the name moves into English-speaking systems, becoming Jorgensen. That shift is more than cosmetic. It shows how names change when they pass through new institutions, new alphabets, and new clerks. A family may have never changed its identity at all, and yet the surname can look different in each country where it appears. If Jorgensen is in your family tree, the trail may lead back to a Danish household, a harbor town, or a rural parish where the name began as a straightforward father and son marker. And once again, the meaning is simple even if the journey is not. Christensen means son of Christian, and Christian is one of the great royal and religious names of Scandinavia. It appears across Denmark and Norway in large numbers, partly because the given name itself was so popular, and partly because patronymics made it endlessly reusable. Christensen often appears in records where families were moving between old tradition and modern identity. A son named after Christian becomes Christensen, and then that line is eventually fixed as a family surname. It is a name that shows the gradual hardening of a once fluid system. If the name is yours, your ancestors may have belonged to that broad Scandinavian middle world. Not aristocracy, not legend, just the practical, durable people who built towns, farms, and new lives across changing centuries. Olsen means son of Olaf, and it is especially common in Sweden. It is closely related to Olafson, but the shorter form became very widespread and easy to carry beyond Sweden's borders. Many immigrants took it with them into North America, where the spelling often stayed intact or shifted slightly. The reason Olsen traveled well is the same reason many Scandinavian surnames did. It was clear, direct, and rooted in a naming system people already understood. Once it became fixed, it could survive almost anywhere. If Olsen appears in your ancestry, it may point to a Swedish line that began under the old patronymic pattern and continued into the era of passports, passenger lists, and permanent surnames. It is a short name with a long afterlife. Kudson means son of Knut, and Knud is the Danish and Norwegian form of Knut. It is one of the most historically resonant Scandinavian surnames because the given name itself is tied to kings and medieval prestige, yet the surname remained fundamentally ordinary in structure. That contrast is what makes Knudsen so interesting. It carries a royal echo, but it was worn by farmers, workers, merchants, and immigrants just like any other patronymic. The name tells you that Scandinavia often blended high history with everyday life in a way that makes family research feel both grand and intimate. If Knudsen is in your tree, the line may lead to Denmark or Norway, and perhaps to a family that crossed borders or oceans while keeping a distinctly northern name. It is a surname that remembers both status and simplicity at once. Taken together, these surnames reveal something bigger than a list of Scandinavian family names. They show how the North worked as a source of identity that was both local and far-reaching. In one generation, a name might identify a man as the son of Anders, Lars, or Niels. In the next, it became fixed, inherited, and portable. Then migration carried it farther still. That is why Scandinavian surnames matter in family history. They are not always signs of aristocracy. They do not always point to one single origin point. But they do preserve structure. They preserve naming habits. They preserve movement. By the way, if you want to dig into your own family line and see where a name may have begun, you can visit www.findyourbloodline.com. The best place to begin is not with legend, but with records. Church books, census records, emigration lists, tax documents, gravestones, and parish registers can tell you whether a Scandinavian surname stayed in one region or moved outward with time. In many cases, the spelling will change along the way. Anderson may become Anderson. Johansson may become Johnson. Sorensen may become Sorensen. Eriksson may become Eriksson. Those small changes are often the clearest signs that a family crossed from one language world into another. That is why the search can feel personal so quickly. You are not only hunting for a surname, you are looking for the moment when a family stepped out of a northern village, a coastal town, or a farmstead and entered a new country, a new language, and a new life. Maybe the change came because of emigration. Maybe it came because of state-standardized surnames. Maybe it came because a clerk wrote the name the way he heard it. However it happened, the trail is real. By the way, if you are curious about your own ancestry and want to follow that trail more closely, you can visit www.findyourbloodline.com. Scandinavian surnames remind us that identity was once built in motion. A son became a new branch, a parish became a record, a farm name became a family name. Then ships carried those names across the sea, and they survived in places where snow and fjords were only stories told by grandparents. If one of these surnames lives in your family tree, it may not prove you belonged to a famous line, but it does suggest that somewhere in your past, there was a family shaped by the old northern world. Practical, mobile, stubborn, and able to endure change without losing its name. And if your family carries one of them, then part of Scandinavia may still be traveling with you.